Hello and welcome to another episode of Wrestling with Memories. My name is Wax the Brain Hussein and I'm joined by Fash the $1,000,000 fan. Fash, how are you?
I am good, and we've been pulling double duty. We talked about more content, Wax, and I'm really excited about this episode.
Ever since you mentioned the idea of doing a podcast, this was the very first thing that I thought about from this era. And even to this day, I would put it up in maybe my top three things to ever happen in wrestling. That's how highly I rate this rivalry.
So, to guess, let everybody in on the secret and let the cat out of the bag. Today, we are going to talk about the legendary feud and angle between the Macho Man Randy Savage and Don't Trust Him Jake the Snake Roberts. And the word snake will be very important in this. I guess just setting you up, Wax. We have discussed in our other episodes what happened at SummerSlam, the wedding reception. In our previous episode, we discussed how the WWF at the time was positioning Sid versus Jake the Snake Roberts and the Undertaker, but Sid is injured now. In the background, the Macho Man has been campaigning to be reinstated, and now he's really pushing for it. He's saying, "Bring me back. Let me wrestle. I want to be a captain of Sid's team at the Survivor Series. Let me have a shot at Jake Roberts and The Undertaker." And really, they did this pivot here, and they really started ramping up with the Sid injury.
Yep. And if you haven't already, check out our archives for our WrestleMania show, which we did at the very beginning, which actually covered the reason the Macho Man is on comms. He's basically had a retirement match with the Ultimate Warrior, which he lost. And since then, he has been out of the ring and he's been commentating for much of that time. And he's also got back with Elizabeth, which was a significant moment through the period. And we've talked about Jake actually several times now on our podcast because he has actually been the MVP of
And we said this,
1991.
didn't we? We said this when we, did that episode of WrestleMania, and we talked about who we thought the MVPs were, and they were Jake and the Undertaker. But as you talk about it, you can really reinforce the fact that Jake the Snake Roberts was so important post WrestleMania to now.
Okay, so with Sid's injury out the way now, we know we need to pivot, and we're going to pivot to the most logical thing, which would be getting the Macho Man back as an active wrestler. Now, I don't know whether the WWF were lucky or whether they, were incredibly smart, but the way they had played this was they would have various segments with the Macho Man and even Elizabeth over the weeks after SummerSlam to just highlight how much trauma that both had went through as a result of Jake the Snake and Undertaker attacking the wedding ceremony. But at the end of each of those segments, they would very importantly and clearly lay out the message that Sid would take revenge on their behalf. Unfortunately, obviously, due to the injury, that didn't happen. And it meant that it was actually very easy for Macho Man to be the one to step in. So just a bit of luck there, Fash, in terms of how that worked out.
Yeah, it was luck, but I think, we've talked about behind the scenes. The idea initially was of the whole retirement angle that the Macho Man wanted to go away from television, start a family with Elizabeth here, and, he got noticeably smaller. And then, he's a commentator. And actually, I loved the kind of commentary trio of Piper, Savage, and Vince. But it seems, as you say, that he's going to do that. And maybe down the line, he's going to come back. But, this situation takes place. And all of that is kind of, put on fast forward.
Yep. So shortly after SummerSlam and before Sid's injury, Jake does an interview with Mean Gene Okerlund and says that, the Macho Man can't do anything. He's not a wrestler. He said he's had his fun with his Elizabeth and he's done with her. Doesn't sound great, but, it's what it is. And he hadn't touched her at that point. I should make clear. And he ends the interview saying that Sid should be careful because you should watch out for what a snake can do. Subsequent to that, we see the Macho Man doing an interview with Mean Gene. It's apparently at the Macho Man's house or outside of the house. They're sitting on a bench, and Macho Man is looking, distraught that he can't do anything to protect the woman that he loves. And he mentions, Mean Gene, you've seen the twinkles gone from her eye because she's suffered so much trauma at the hands of Jake the Snake. And he's really keen to play up Sid's part in this upcoming revenge battle against Jake the Snake. And they also make reference to, and I couldn't actually see whether it was on TV, Fast, you might have seen it, but Macho Man goes to Jack Tunney's office and asks to be reinstated. And Jack Tunney refuses to reinstate him, so the Macho Man wrecks his office. And I'm not sure whether this was on TV or
I, I,
not,
I don't
but
remember this. I
no,
actually
but
don't
they
remember
make
this
reference
thing.
to it in the interview and in a couple of other segments. So they're very much playing up to the fact that Macho Man is still retired. He's a commentator. He can't do anything, but he's chomping at the bit. Really, if he could do something, he would be there in a heartbeat.
I guess slowly, they are showing that now he is full good guy. Um, with the said injury as well and things happening, Rowdy Piper's supporting him, other wrestlers are supporting him. And what I find interesting here is the fact that, you talk about Jack Tunney and he keeps saying, yeah, I'm taking it under advisement and, I'm thinking about it. But as Bobby Heenan said, all you had to do was basically grease Tunney's palm because everybody knows Jack Tunney was a corrupt man.
Just very quickly on Jack Tunney, we genuinely believed at the time that he was
We
the
thought he was
owner
the
and
guy.
boss of the WWF. It only later transpired that we found out that he was actually, I think he was heading up part of their business in maybe Canada or something. It was.
Yep. And then he
Um,
also, I'm sure down the line we'll talk about how he left the company. But do you, sidetrack here, but I think it's important. Do you miss this type of authority figure? Because obviously the authority figure of post Eric Bischoff and even more famously Vince McMahon has been all power. Whereas this was this kind of neutral kind of authority figure that only turned up when was required. Do you think wrestling is missing this today? Because even Tony Khan now in AEW is moving more towards what he said he wouldn't.
I do a little bit. I think it adds some what do you call it? Some plausibility to everything. It makes everything seem a little bit more serious and a bit more official when you have it. I also miss the general manager roles that they used to have for Raw and SmackDown in later years. I always thought those were interesting roles for interesting characters who could
Yeah,
maybe wrestle
yeah.
anymore, but had a lot to still give to the wrestling business. But this is another role that could easily have been fulfilled by someone. I suppose now that it's probably you couldn't do it because everybody knows Vince is the boss, and no
Yeah,
matter
and
who you put on
I
TV.
think now they've just done it into the ground. And that's why I think it needs something simpler because, as you say, post Eric Bischoff doing it in '96 and then Vince McMahon from '98 onwards, it's just a rehash now again and again of that authority figure, and they keep going back to it. Whereas Jack Tunney was, as you say, we believed he was the man in charge, and he was this typical suit that was totally disconnected with what the audience wanted. So it was simple, but it worked for that time, and you believed there was a board that put together matches and what have you. I mean, the key thing you've highlighted here is the vulnerability of the Macho Man. And what it reminded me of was the time I turned up at your wedding with a snake, and you couldn't do anything about it. So obviously this is probably why you're also, very much a loyalist with the Macho Man.
Definitely, I've been in his shoes. I mean, the
So
closer
the
we get,
bloody hell, Sid Justice turned up at that wedding as well with the chair, and I had to run away. But once again, he wasn't there later on when you needed him.
indeed, but unfortunately, just mentioned said he gets injured, and the closer we move to Survivor Series, the more they pivot towards the Macho Man, and they're talking about all these fan comments and fan emails that are coming in. Not emails because there was no email
There was no
back then,
emails in
but
1991,
fan
mate.
letters coming in at that point, supporting the Macho Man's cause. And there's a specific interview where he comes up, comes to address that with Elizabeth, and Elizabeth is pleading with Jack Tunney to reinstate the Macho Man. And it's funny, although on screen this is all happening, off screen, Macho Man is actually wrestling on certain house shows, but not as the Macho Man, but as the Madness, which is interesting. And I don't know how they got away with that, but the WWF have always tried to separate out, what happens in a house show is not on TV,
And
so
I guess they've
therefore,
played this angle a few times over time, haven't they? Because you're a big NWA fan as well. And they did this with Dusty back in the day. I think he was the Midnight Rider or something, and everybody knew it was Dusty Rhodes. Years later, there's Mr. America, Hulk Hogan. So at this point, I guess similarly, everybody knew it's the Macho Man, but he's playing this madness character, so you're getting around it. But yeah, they couldn't acknowledge that on television, and that was the thing. As we keep talking about, you've got these kind of different storylines and matches which take place on the road, which is for those areas, and then what the television storylines are, which are for the mainstream.
yep. Only a couple of weeks prior to Survivor Series, that interview takes place with Mean Gene, and Elizabeth is pleading for obviously reinstatement. And then we come to what is probably the most important moment of this feud, the biggest moment of '91 for me, and one of the most abiding memories that I will always have of wrestling, no matter how old I get. But in essence,
This was not for the weak of
this
heart.
was definitely this was so far ahead of its time that I still would struggle to see something like this on TV today. Never mind back in '91.
Right, Wax, then talk us through this extremely historic angle.
Well, in walks Jake for his match on TV at Superstars, and obviously Macho Man is on commentary. Nothing he can really do. He's not been reinstated as a wrestler. But Jake the Snake has a very quick match. I don't know if you've seen it. It's literally a DDT. He finishes off the jobber, and he stands around the ring, and then he looks towards the commentary section, and immediately, again, Vince and Roddy, I think it is, they're saying to Macho Man, just watch out. You don't want to get involved with this character. Jake is looking over at the commentary box. He sees Macho Man. Macho Man sees Jake, and Jake starts to goad the Macho Man to try and make him come into the ring. Eventually, his tactics work. Macho Man is so angry at this point that he's not been able to get his hands on Jake. He's been, Jack Tunney's refused his request to be reinstated. But he's had it. He can no longer sit down and just watch what's happening. He gets up from his chair. The crowd erupts, whether that's the real crowd or the fake crowd, who knows? But the crowd erupts on what the Superstar taping I was watching, and he makes his way to the ring. Very quickly, Jake gets the upper hand on the Macho Man. Macho Man obviously not been wrestling for months, so that makes perfect sense. And he gets tied up in the bottom two ropes of the ring, which is always a really cool moment. So anytime ever I see a wrestler caught up in the ropes, I always think, wow, that's a really cool thing to see. It's a cool visual. But we know that wrestlers sometimes find it very tricky to get out of that situation as well. But anyway, he's stuck in the bottom two ropes, and Jake's got his man exactly where he wants him. He brings out the bag with the snake in it. Opens the bag, and he takes out this huge cobra.
It's a king cobra, isn't it? It is impressive to look at.
Very impressive. And the shots of the crowd before this moment, and people are shocked to see what's happening. They're one of their favorites. The Macho Man is helpless. Nobody's coming in to help, and we don't know what's going to happen next. We obviously see the snake. Thus far, nobody's really been touched by the snake. In any segment that they've ever done before, but somehow Jake, he just pushes the snake's head towards the Macho Man's arm, and it latches on, and it's a horrifying visual, but it's also like so just like mesmerizing as well. When you're watching it, you're just thinking, wow, like what the hell, this is so serious, and why is there not anybody stopping it? And the drama is it's off the charts. Isn't it?
Well, this is as real can be, right? Because the fact is, the snake does bite into his bicep, and you see blood. So this isn't something which is fake. It's an actual king cobra, obviously defanged. But the fact that the Macho Man let them do that, and it's, as you say, they keep the camera on it for so long. You've got the kind of the face of the snake and his bicep, and it's totally biting in there. And that's something, look, this is 1991, right? There's a family-friendly audience in there. You just would never have imagined that. And even as you see, you watch it now, it's still, I would say similar to you, if you're talking about 10 moments that, people look at and watch again, this is one of those, because it was so different and it was so real in that sense. And it just showed the absolute evil of this Jake the Snake Roberts character.
Absolutely, and there's more shots of the crowd. The crowd are absolutely horrified. There's children within this arena, and everybody is just shocked in horror. Elizabeth's obviously trying to come into the ring, but Roddy Piper stops her. It's strange that obviously nobody comes in to save the Macho Man. Really,
yeah, Piper didn't really make that final journey, and that's the thing with wrestling storylines, because you're thinking, why is he not jumping in or someone else? but then you don't get the angle. But yeah, so I think they played around it with Piper trying to save Elizabeth and stopping her from going in. And then as
Macho
usual,
Man sells this whole thing incredibly well,
amazingly.
and Jake's, his passion and his fervor to do damage to Macho Man it just feels so real. And he's got a very calculated way about him as well. It's not as if he's shouting and screaming. Everything he does in a certain manner. He just makes it look and seem so real. So I think eventually they get people in the ring to get.
But
Jake
even in
to
this
stop.
one, when they get him and Jake scurries away from memory, as you say, Macho Man plays it so well because he's kind of, punching in the air and he's falling down to show that he's lost his senses, and this is some things he's happened. Obviously, a snake is bit. Man, they're playing off the idea that actually there's venom there, and the
Yep.
snake did have venom not being defanged. So he's, as you say, selling it incredibly well. What I remember about this is, having watched it again recently, but I remember at the time, was there's this little kid in the show who is bawling his eyes out, and that really sells it because it is this, storyline and angle which was far away from the PG friendly stuff we've seen. And going back to this year with Jake, everything and The Undertaker was darker. So locking up people in coffins, now a King Cobra. This angle, which is the most famous, it was far darker than anything else that was going on in the
And
show.
and that's why Jake had actually a lot of say in everything that went on with his character throughout this period. And later on, he was actually hired as part of the creative team. It didn't work out for whatever reason, but he had a great mind for the business, and what works and what didn't work, especially around his character. And every time they made use of him for that, it worked superbly well.
Yeah, great psychology, and just
Yeah.
played it so well. But the Macho Man, see, he's the most kind of volatile, high octane character. So both of them coming together was actually brilliant. And like I say, that's the lasting kind of visual of that episode of Superstars, and it's right before the Survivor Series, so they've kind of ended on this huge angle. And people are left in shock, and I think they come back from a break, and Vince McMahon says something like, we hear Randy's okay, and he ends it kind of flabbergasted. And really, it's as you say, one of the most incredible endings. We're basically right on the doorstep of Survivor Series. There's going to be an event prior to that, which is taped ahead of time, called Survivor Series Showdown. But everyone now thinks, okay, it's a no-brainer. The Macho Man is going to lead the team of the LOD and the Big Boss Man against Jake Roberts, the Natural Disasters, and IRS. So this is going to be one of the big matches at Survivor Series. But then we land at Survivor Series, and Jack Tunney has an announcement at the top of the event, and it's not what we think it is.
No, this time Jack Tunney has finally relented to the pleas of the fans and the wrestlers, and to Elizabeth and Macho Man. He is allowing the Macho Man to be reinstated. But he announces also that Macho Man will not be taking part in Survivor Series because, as he's not been an active wrestler for so long, he's not ready. But he'll give him an extra few days for Tuesday in Texas, which we're going to talk about more about Survivor Series and Tuesday in Texas very soon. But we just want to focus very specifically on the Macho Man and Jake the Snake. While they weren't in action, there was a promo from each of the two at Survivor Series. And again, if you haven't seen them already, you should go out your way to just see how well both guys can deliver with Mean Gene on the stick. We're fast forwarding a few more days to Tuesday in Texas, and this is where we're going to get the first showdown between Jake the Snake and Macho Man. And I'm not really going to cover the match in a lot of detail. We might do that on our Tuesday in Texas episode. But what follows the match, and I should maybe mention here that the Macho Man gets the win. But what follows the match are 3 sensational DDTs from Jake the Snake, who's absolutely livid that he's lost to Macho Man, and he's got the Macho Man down and out for the count again, very similar to a couple of weeks earlier. And this time again, he, even though at this point Jack Tunney has banned all reptiles from the ring, which is a ridiculous statement, but no snakes will be allowed at the ring. He still has a small-ish bag which we think has a snake inside it. So he pulls that out, and he's ready to release it on the Macho Man when Elizabeth makes her way to the ring, and she jumps on Macho Man. She's protecting him while Jake is about to drop whatever he's got in the bag on him and her. She's absolutely pleading for his life. She's done a really good job of selling this. Macho Man is still down and out, and it's it's at this moment where Elizabeth's not been in the ring that many times, but she's done a superb job every time she is, because you believe her that she's got no ears about her really. She loves this guy, and she just wants to protect him with everything that she's got. But that leads to what I think is maybe equally shocking moment to the snake
It's probably
bite.
more shocking when you put it in the under the lens of 2021.
So Jake the Snake, he grabs Elizabeth, brings her to her feet, and he's really annoyed with Elizabeth, for coming out and begging for Macho Man, and he slaps her,
Yeah.
and it came out of nowhere. But when I seen it, and I didn't remember it happening back in the day, but I was just so shocked. I was like, "Wow, I can't believe that actually happened." I wasn't a very hard slap, obviously, because we're not trying to hurt Elizabeth in real life, but it was still significant, and I was certainly shocked by it, Fash.
And that's it. It's like when we talk attitude era and pushing the button, this is the extreme. So, first is the cobra bite, and then there's this. And as you say, your character doesn't age well. Now it is a storyline, but it's still in front of a live audience. And at that point, people see this as being real. I mean, we're watching this as kids, right? We're thinking, "Oh my god, this is real." So it was really pushing the buttons to the extreme and making this even more personal than it was by using Elizabeth like this. And what I remember is the promo after that's cut by Jake, which is, he's talking about how much he enjoyed it, which once again, under the lens of 2021, just, it's really pushing the boundaries and actually crossing the lines. You
Yeah,
wouldn't
he
see
he says,
WWE
yeah.
doing that today, I don't think.
He says specifically, he's got so much contempt for Elizabeth. He says he doesn't want his woman to be on her knees. He wants her to be standing up and fighting for what's his, for what's hers. So he just shows his, utter contempt for both the Macho Man and Elizabeth, and following that later on in the show. We've actually got a promo by Macho Man, and I think this is actually one of the best things
Yeah.
you'll see a wrestler do. In the backstage, he's so pained, he's so hurt that he's been taken out by Jake the Snake again, and this time Elizabeth has gotten hurt as a result. I think a tremendous moment, and I would recommend, if you, for no other reason, you watch Tuesday in Texas, you watch it just for those moments.
Absolutely, and I think this was the thing, right? It didn't matter who won the match. As you say, the matchman won the match, and it was a pretty quick match. But it was more about the angle and the storyline. So what they were essentially showing was, doesn't matter who really wins and loses here. Jake the Snake Roberts just upping the ante and really pushing the limits here and really trying to hurt both of them. And as you say, the Matchman's promo is incredible. It is real emotion in there, and really sets up the future of this storyline, but you're thinking, what can they do next as you leave that event. But
Yep.
one thing I wanted to maybe mention was about the whole snake thing. Was Jake the Snake Roberts did an interview some years ago where he said that obviously the Macho Man was pretty paranoid about the whole angle, and he kept asking Jake, is the snake defanged and are you sure? And he wasn't really trusting Jake, so it took a lot of convincing. But when you see storyline, you can see why, how deep those fangs go in to the Macho Man's arm. But you can, there was obviously trepidation around it, and Macho Man was one of those people that wasn't always the most trusting, and Jake really had to assure him. I think something, I could be wrong here, but I think Macho Man wanted Jake to show him the snake biting
Yep.
his arm before, to show that everything was above board. So it just tells you the kind of things that are going backstage as well, and the kind of nervousness around doing this angle. And I'm sure with the whole Elizabeth thing, Macho Man, would
We've
have
heard
brought
so
it to
much that he's
Jake if Jake would have, put a little bit more force into that, or done something which, wasn't part of the script or went too far in terms of, acting out that angle, then the Macho Man would have been, hell on earth for Jake the Snake Roberts.
Yeah, I mean, these were the most significant parts of this feud
Yeah.
that we're going to cover today.
Yeah, absolutely.
It carries on into 92 at the Rumble and post that, where we do finally get an ending to it. But what we've talked about in this episode so far, this is the most significant parts of the feud, and certainly the most memorable things that have happened on the WWF TV for, well, we still remember it now 30 years on, so clearly it's had a lasting impact.
Yeah, certainly, like I said, recommend everyone going online if you can't remember this, and watching these segments and these angles, and the events in which the two come together. But as you say, at this point it seems it's set up for a real blood feud that's going to go on for months, and maybe a blow off at WrestleMania. But as we keep on saying in this period, there's so many continuous changes that we're maybe not going to get that. But yeah, let's leave it for now, Wax, because we'll discuss the next parts of this storyline when we discuss the Royal Rumble. And indeed, there's another match between them post the Royal Rumble, which will be the blow off to this. But yeah, we were expecting this to go on for a while, but as you always say, cards subject to change, and indeed storyline subject to change as well.
Yep, Fash. Before we finish off on this episode, just give me your overall thoughts on both Jake the Snake and Macho Man around this period. What your thoughts are on how well they performed as their characters, and how important they were for the business.
Well, I think, as I said before, I thought Jake was the MVP of the year. I mean, there's very few people who are better heels than Jake the Snake Roberts, because he was not the cool heel, right? When he's being a heel, he's this really despicable individual who is dangerous, and he was different from everyone else, right? He's not shouting, bawling. He's not the biggest, but he comes across, as extremely dangerous, and it's a shame that his career's gonna peter out to a large degree because of personal issues and other situations. But to me, at this point, he is absolute at his best. Some of the Macho Man, he had a few years where he wasn't really doing much, and then the Ultimate Warrior feud really brought things together. But I think at this point was where his fan base probably grew to its greatest level, because they showed the kind of human side of him, and this kind of this sort of storyline, having Elizabeth involved, I think he was right up there now as the number 2 babyface behind Hulk Hogan. And maybe for some, actually his popularity is even a bit more, because there is this, he's got this emotional feud, and there's this whole storyline about absolute failure. They played it really well, as you say, in terms of let's reinstate him, and the fans wanted that, and then he's in this brilliant feud, and Elizabeth's going to be a part of his future storylines as well. So I think both of them here were excellent. But and obviously, if we're looking at the greatest legends, then the Macho Man certainly is, in the upper echelon, and Jake the Snake Roberts as well, for his psychology and just how he behaves as a heel, would be right up there as well.
Yep, and Macho Man's not done. He's going to go on to another feud soon after,
well,
which in my book is equally as interesting and exciting as this one is. But we'll save that for
exactly.
For
that's for another
episode.
day. And like you say, 92. There's so much happening that both of these guys are going to be in the news for different reasons. But no, it was good to kind of revisit this angle. I said, I know you've been very keen to talk about it, and we've got there. It's a special episode to look at this amazing feud. As ever, give us your feedback. Let us know what else you'd like us to cover.
Yep. So we're not far from the end of 91. We've only got one more episode, I think, for covering this year. That'll be covering Survivor Series and the Tuesday in Texas pay-per-views. And then we move on to 1992, which I think most wrestling fans will agree is one of their most favorite years. But thanks as always for joining us. Always subscribe to our videos on YouTube. Check us out on Spotify, on any other podcasting apps that you use. And we look forward to joining you again soon.